Good day, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar on public charging infrastructure deployment strategies and business model. My name is Per-Anders Videll. I'm the program manager within the IA. One program that is very close to my heart is the EVI initiative under the Clean Energy Ministerial. And another one, a very related one, is the new JEF-funded Global E-Mobility Program. We're here today. We have two excellent programs, two excellent panels with very good speakers. One focusing first on strategies for EV deployment and business review of business models. And the second, we'll look at how these different deployment strategies can also be applied in low and middle income countries. I will pass on the floor now to my dear colleague, Alejandro Hernandez, who is the head of the IA's Renewable Integration and Secure Electricity Unit, what we call RISE, for some introductory remarks. But before doing that, I just want to let you know that this event is recorded and the recording will be uploaded on our website. Thanks very much for joining, and I now turn to you, Alejandro, for some introductory remarks. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Per. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this IEA webinar on public charging infrastructure deployment, strategies, and business models. My name is Alejandro Hernandez. I am the head of the Renewable Integration and Secure Electricity Unit here at the IEA. This webinar is held in the frame of the Global E-Mobility Program to support countries in their shift to electric mobility. This program is funded by the JEF, the Global Environment Facility, and we are grateful to be part of it. The program was launched 1 month ago at COP26 during Transport Day. And the objective is to support the electric mobility projects in over 30 low and middle income countries worldwide with the help of several international organizations. There are 4 global thematic working groups under this that will deliver knowledge materials and tools and establish a network of global advocacy, technology, and policy advice. The IEA coordinates 2 of these working groups, which gather countries, representatives, experts from industry and academia, and international organizations. Today's webinars falls under the scope of the thematic working group on EV charging, grid integration, and batteries. And more specifically, it will address the issue of public charging infrastructure rollout strategies and the regulatory measures that can enable successful business models. Just to provide some background of the relevance of this, the transport sector role in achieving the Paris Agreement's objectives is crucial, as it represents 20% of total emissions from the energy sector. Traditionally, the transport sector has been heavily dependent on oil. In 2020, 90% of the sector's energy needs were met by oil products. But in the IEA net zero by 2050 scenario, the decarbonization of the road transport depends on a very large extent on the electrification. In that scenario, electricity becomes the dominant fuel in the transport industry by the early 2040s already. And by 2050, there are 2 billion electric vehicles, which include plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles, and fuel cell electric vehicles on the road. This is compared to the 11 million electric vehicles that we can see in the roads nowadays. In the net zero scenario also sees 1.2 billion electric 2- and 3-wheelers and 15 million electric buses on the roads by 2050. And this represents a considerable increase in the global EV stocks and consequentially also in the charging infrastructure. But the shift to e-mobility will not be possible without a solid network of private and public chargers. Range anxiety is one of the barriers to the shift to sustainable electric mobility, and is deterring the potential users and is leading to growth in batteries. We see public charging infrastructure as a necessary complement to private infrastructure and a way to avoid unreasonable oversizing of batteries in vehicles. In addition, not everyone can benefit from a private charger at home or in the office. And users expect public chargers to be accessible, reliable, and affordable. The rollout of public charging infrastructure will therefore be very important, but it will be also complex. To meet the mobility and climate objectives and to ensure electricity security, charging infrastructure deployment requires coordination and planning among many actors and across sectors. Authorities at the national and local levels, vehicle manufacturers, real estate owners, private companies to supply equipment and provide services, and of course, electricity grid operators. Deployment needs to take into account many types of driving patterns, vehicles, and usages. And solutions need to be tailored to a very diverse market structure and demographics. These variables will considerably affect the business models applicable to the infrastructure rollout. It is therefore important for policymakers to make informed decisions when rolling out public charging infrastructure. I am very happy to welcome today's experts who will present the strategies for public charging infrastructure deployment. They will share their experience and review different available business models. And we will discuss how the findings apply to low and medium income economies. The IEA intends to gather the learnings from this webinar and release next spring a policy brief on the charging infrastructure rollout strategies and regulatory measures to enable successful business models. So without further ado, I will pass back the floor to Per, and I'm looking forward to the great discussion today.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, and thanks for those introductory remarks. We will now move into the first session of this webinar. We have three speakers with us today, three experts that will give their perspectives on what the strategies, on their experience on strategies for EV charging deployment, but also business models that have been working in the past. So first speaker, Sarah Pasquier, country manager of for France for Fastnet. Fastnet, I'm sure many of you are well aware of this company. It's a Dutch company, develop networks of fast charging stations across Europe. Recently deployed the first charging station on the outer route from Paris to Rhône. And I'm based in Oxford, and I also saw Fastnet being very active here on one of the projects that will be the largest charging infrastructure project in the UK at the moment. So it's great to have you here. You're a former colleague of IEA at IEA, and with several years of experience on private e-mobility sector. The second speaker is Sajid Mubashir, a scientist from Department of Science and Technology of the Government of India. You're also part of the Working Group 4, which is one of the reasons being here today, as this webinar is also organized under that working group responsibilities. You have a lot of experience, of course, from India, and you will give some of that perspective to us today, which will be very interesting as well to listen to. And you have extensive experience, of course, on when it relates to public-private research partnerships for e-mobility as well. So thank you very much for joining us here today in the first panel. And then the last speaker we have from the United States, a man with two jobs still, I think, both a chief analyst within the US Department of Energy, but also team lead within NREL. And you've done a lot of work both in the US, but also globally, both when it comes to policies for EVs, but particularly also on the charging infrastructure side. So thanks very much for being here today, the three of you. How it will work is that I will first hand over to Sarah, and then Sajid, and then Matteo for your presentations. And I have my colleague Julia, who will also be here today, and who will help to ask some of the questions to follow up as well. So first over to you, Sarah, and then I'll hand over to over to Julia to also manage the question and answers during this session. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, and good morning to our colleagues in America, and good evening to our colleagues in Asia. I'm Sarah Pasquier, and I'm so pleased to be here with you representing Fastnet. As we heard earlier, Fastnet is a company, a European company based in 6 countries that is building and operating fast charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. And our goal is to give freedom to the electric driver and to accelerate the transition to sustainable mobility. And I guess most of you drive electric cars, and if you do, you're probably very frustrated by the inability to drive anywhere and have the same conditions as people who drive petrol cars. So right now we are working hard to build and operate network of 1,000 fast charging stations on prime locations where all electric vehicles can charge with renewable energy from the sun and wind. So today in my presentation, I'm going to share with you our experience across 6 countries. What we found has really helped accelerate the deployment of fast charging infrastructure for light duty vehicles, but also heavy duty vehicles. And in particular, give share our thoughts on what governments can do to push this market forward. So here's the network that I just described. We do fast charging. So how do you describe fast charging? As you're probably aware, there's something called slow charging or normal charging. Cars can add about 20 kilometers of range in 30 minutes. We don't do this. We find this very old-fashioned. It takes up a lot of space in parking spots. And in order to have millions of electric cars on the road, you're going to have millions of these slow chargers. So we go for a different model, which is ultra fast charging, where in 10 to 15, 20 minutes, you can fill up your electric car and continue on your way. So we invest in the most powerful and the fastest charging on the road because our business model really focuses on utilization. So we need cars to come in and leave. And with our stations, we can charge hundreds of cars a day. And we think this is necessary in order to really move towards a sustainable transport sector. So why do we do fast charging as opposed to slow charging? If you look at new models of electric vehicles, they all have a range, most of them have a range of over 300 kilometers. Premium cars can already go 450 kilometers. As you may know, charging speed is determined by the car, but premium cars are able to charge at more than 250 kilowatts. So we're investing in chargers that are around 300 kilowatts, and that allows, as I mentioned earlier, 10 to 20 minutes for charging. This changes everything. You know, it used to be that you had to wait 12 hours to charge your car, and now you can do it in 10 minutes. That's very comparable to a petrol-powered car. So we are currently putting our charging stations along the motorways. As was mentioned earlier, if you're in France, you can now go from Paris to Geneva and stop. We're going to have 9 stations open by the end of January. But we're not just putting them on motorways. We think it's also important in city hubs. So this was a study that was done by Wavestone, and they estimated the demand for fast charging in cities. And if you look, for example, Paris, where I'm based, let's see, here you have Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, Bordeaux, Lille, Nice, Nantes, Strasbourg, Rennes. All right, let's take Lyon. It's expected that you're going to need to have 16 fast charging hubs by 2030. And each of those hubs, you need at least 14 chargers, which means 28 charging spots. So just in order to meet the demand that we're going to have, for example, in France, you're going to need 16 of these hubs with 28 charging spots each. If we're talking to our colleagues who are in emerging markets, I think you're also going to see a chicken and the egg. If you build this infrastructure, demand will come. And I think it will come a lot faster than you think it will. We started in the Netherlands 10 years ago, building charging infrastructure on the motorways. And if you look at the Netherlands, the market for electric cars has just shot up along with the construction of this infrastructure. So I will get to the advice we have later for governments, but my advice would be, don't build infrastructure for current demand. Really be thinking about the future and the future demand. Build infrastructure that's, quote, future proof, and that with time can be added to and increased as demand increases. So who needs charging? You know, my colleague in Oxford mentioned earlier that you know, in cities, a lot of people that may not have their own charging infrastructure at home or at work. So anyone even those who do, taxis, for example, they need to quickly charge and continue on their day. So if they can do that in 10 minutes, that's a game changer. Car rental companies, people who don't have, maybe they're tourists and they're on their way, residents who don't have charging infrastructure. So having these big hubs, just like a traditional gas station where people come and go, can really meet demand and in very specific locations. So here's some guidance on how government can promote this future-oriented and customer-generated infrastructure. So I'm going to touch quickly on 6 points. One is on safety and comfort. Second is on scalability. Third is on visibility. Fourth is on environment. Fifth is on customer service. And the last is on pricing. But if I can pass on one message, the key barrier, so Fastnet, it's been around 10 years. We have a lot of expertise. We've raised a lot of money. Our main challenge is finding land on high traffic sites to put our stations. We don't need subsidies. The grid connections are often there, which may not be the case in some emerging economies where you have big constraints on capacity. But in the countries where we're working, all of that is in place. What we're missing is access to public land where we can build these big stations. So what we ask for is, if governments have land where they think that there's charging needs, that they tender that land out, that they bid it out, and so that private companies can try to make the best offer for customers. So what we advise countries not to do, we advise them not to just give it to the incumbents. So a lot of times governments think that it makes sense that on public land, there are already gas stations, right, who already have a contract with the government. What does not make sense is to have gas stations put chargers on the back parking lot, because that charging infrastructure is not at all adapted to what the future needs. And there's also often a conflict of interest. So there needs to be competition. Companies need to be able to compete for this public land in order to make the best offer for the EV drivers. So let's go into each one of them. Safety and comfort. So we build large drive-through stations. The one in Oxford that was mentioned earlier is not necessarily a drive-through station. So we have different kinds of models. But on high traffic areas, this is what is preferred, because customers can come in and no matter where the charging point is on their vehicle, the cable can reach it. So in some cars, the charger is in the front. Sometimes the plug is on the side. Sometimes it's in the back. With charge through stations, it doesn't matter. You can charge on any portion of the car. Also, often people will put chargers in parking lots or parking spots. That's not adapted to, it's not safe. So when you're going to be having lots of demand, hold on one second. When you have lots of demand, you don't want cars driving backwards into parking spots, or their long lines, excuse me. Also, in terms of safety and comfort, sometimes companies try to put in as many chargers as possible. And here's an example. And I mentioned earlier that the chargers are the charging port is located in different parts of the car. For example, in the middle drawing, and this just doesn't work. So you need to be able to have enough space that all cars, regardless of their make and model, are available to charge. So I talked about building stations that are big enough for the future, that are scalable. Here, you may start, if the demand is low and you think that there are not many cars on the road, you may start with 4 charging points, charging places. But make sure that you have enough land allocated that when utilization hits a certain level, that you can upgrade the station and increase the capacity. I mentioned already the importance of high traffic locations, but one thing that's also important is visibility. How many of us have been driving our electric car and we can't find the station? We're looking around. I give you some examples here. Just look at these pictures. Can you find the charging station? That's dangerous. You don't want cars just driving around looking. So we build these big stations where you can see them from far. There you can see our canopies with photovoltaics that help us charge 2 to 3 cars a day, but it also helps customers find it. And it also sends a signal. It says electric vehicles are important, they're the future, and they're just important as petrol cars, and customers should have the same rights as petrol drivers. Sustainability, this is a great opportunity to build stations that are sustainable. The number one point is to have electricity that's renewable electricity. Otherwise, what's the point of having electric cars? So solar, hydroelectricity, wind. And so when you're doing your criteria for a tender for public infrastructure, make sure that the electricity that is being supplied is certified renewable. We build stations with sustainably purchased wood. We also have photovoltaics. That may be a little too elaborate when you're doing your criteria, but at least at a minimum, electricity needs to be renewable. A lot of times people think, okay, we buy the charger and we set it up and that's all we need to do. But this is a new market. A lot of people don't know how to charge electric vehicles. They're first-time EV owners. They need a lot of hand-holding, which is why when you're doing when you're putting out tenders for public infrastructure, make sure to include rigorous customer service and maintenance. So at Fastnet, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, customer service in 5 languages. We have remote maintenance, so we can, on our chargers, we know in advance if there's a problem so that we can fix it. We guarantee uptime of 99.9%. If you are a French electric car driver today, you know that most of the infrastructure on the motorways doesn't work. I drove to Lyon. It took me 7 hours, a trip that should have taken 3.5, because the infrastructure, it didn't work. I had to go to 4 different stations, and that's because the infrastructure wasn't built through competitive processes. The incumbent was allowed to add chargers. They didn't do customer service. They didn't do maintenance. It broke down. The best offer was not provided because there was no competition to build it and to operate it. Price, there's a lot of discussion about what price is fair. I would say that, you might say, okay, well, electricity for a residential customer might cost 16 cents. So charging should cost 16 cents a kilowatt hour. Actually, the price encompasses not only the electricity, but the CapEx. So let's talk about business model. When you're building a station, the CapEx, our stations cost between 500,000 and €1 million. So there's the grid connection that's often very high cost. Then there's the construction costs, there's the chargers, there's the roofs that protect customers from rain and from sun and from wind. So all of that is very expensive. And so the price needs to be able to cover those CapEx and also expansion. So as what we were mentioning now is that the price that we charge customers, it covers our CapEx and also covers our expansion in building new stations. In the first 3 or 4 years, at least in Europe, and I think I'd be curious in the question and answer to hear what you say, but we don't expect to make money because the demand is so low. But this is why we try to get contracts of at least 15 years, because that way, when the demand does get higher in year 7, in year 8, in year 9, that the infrastructure is built. So for the first few years, we're losing money, but we're betting and investing in the market. So that's why prices seem high compared to the electricity price. The best way to get low prices, again, is through competition. Get operators like Fastnet, like Ionity, like Total, like LAGO to compete to provide the best price as well as the best infrastructure. So just in conclusion, I wanted to highlight kind of the main enabling conditions to build sustainable, high quality infrastructure for light duty vehicles. The first is to treat charging as an independent business. So a lot of our competitors, they sell petrol or they do their restaurants or their what. the core of their business is not charging. And as a result, they haven't thought about what the customer needs. They don't build customer-centered infrastructure. So what you want to do is not bundle different services. So when you put out a tender, don't put hydrogen with fast charging, don't put petrol with fast charging, don't put restoration with fast, because each of those needs to be able to compete on its own merits. If you put fast charging or charging on its own, then it will compete with other charging services so that you get the best singular charging service as opposed to the best grouped services. Second, I already mentioned the need for 15-year contracts. As I said, charging is not, you can't make any money off it on the next few years. This is why you need to have contract. That's why developers like us and operators like us need to have at least 15 years in order to do the investment. And in each of these cases, I've given you an example of a public tender where they've had these kind of criteria. And I'm happy afterwards to forward you these tenders so you can see how governments have thought through charging infrastructure. The third take home is to have enough space and visibility to make scalable infrastructure. So as I mentioned earlier, you might build something small, you might start with 4 charging points, but have enough room that in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years, you can have 16 charging points and be able to charge hundreds of vehicles a day. And the last one is really about competition. Make sure that you're not just giving out public money to people who are going to put chargers in parking spots. It's really a disservice to customers because it leads to bad charging experiences. Provide land, tender that land out, make companies compete in order to make the best offer to customers. So with that, I will conclude, and thank you very much for your time. I look forward to questions in a bit.
Thank you very much, Sarah. This was really very interesting, and we have several questions in the Q&A function. Just to remind all the attendees that if you have questions, please do use the Q&A function. The chat should be reserved for questions in terms of organizational purposes. Sarah, let's start with the first question since we're short on time to try and get the most out of your knowledge. We have Francois, who is asking if you can elaborate why fast charging in cities is for everyone. He's mentioning cars are parked more than 90% of the time, and Uber is stating that overnight charging might be sufficient for long-range battery electric vehicles, Uber drivers.
It's a good point, and I think that it's good to have a mix of charging infrastructure options. When you're looking at millions of electric cars on the road, parking spot charging is not going to be sufficient. You're going to need to be able to charge hundreds of cars a day quickly. And if you look at charging times, they're decreasing with time. So I think it's a question, do you want to litter your entire city with these chargers, or do you want to have hubs where people can go and leave quickly? Also, there's a big problem with parking spot charging. Delivery vans will sit there, other cars will park there. So it's very hard to police and make sure that those locations are available for those who need it. In terms of Uber, we've been looking at different systems, for example, having dynamic pricing or time of day pricing. So in the middle of the night where Uber drivers are picking up people in clubs and taking them to the restaurants, we might have a happy hour, so where it's cheaper to charge. So we're looking at ways to be able to do charging throughout the night and to incentivize it from an economic standpoint.
Thank you very much. So it's a matter of equilibrating and balancing out the needs. I have another question for you from Irina, who is asking if you need to install EV chargers on existing fuel retail outlets that are located along motorways so that drivers can rest, shop, and have coffee or snack while the car is charging. Would you advise that?
So this is also an axe that we're looking at. So our focus in the past has been on motorways, but now we are signing partnerships with retail because, as you said, that's where people live. They go and they buy some food and they buy something at the store. So in different areas you can put in different chargers. So some of our competitors are doing 50 kilowatt chargers in retail parks. We are opting to do 300 kilowatt. We think that customers will prefer to charge quickly and continue on their way. So you're absolutely right. These retail parks are a big future area of business for charging companies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And a very last one, because I see it has been asked several times. What would has the impact of fast charging on the battery health been taken into account?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we use batteries from different manufacturers. In France, we're putting in place Alpatronic. In other parts in Europe, we've used ABB. We're also talking to other manufacturers about our future stations, and they're doing a lot of research on the impact of fast charging on batteries. And for the moment, we haven't seen anything that would make us think that this isn't something that electric drivers could do, that there's any real harm to batteries for this kind of fast charging. But it's something, of course, as the charging speeds increase, that we're watching carefully.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think we will have to get to the next speaker now. I hope that all the other questions will have answers in the rest of the webinar. And of course, I think Sarah had in her slides her contact, so perhaps for the more pressing issues, that could be an option as well. Thank you very much, Sarah, and I'll give the floor back to Per.
Thank you very much, Julian, and thanks, Sarah, for that excellent presentation. As we stated, all the material from this meeting will also be uploaded on the event page, so you can access the presentations. And thanks very much for those clear recommendations as well as you had in your presentation. So going from Western Europe to India, our next speaker, Majid Mubashir, over to you to present your perspective and some of your recommendations to the group here. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
And the slides, is it good? Showing up?
It's all right.
Okay, great. Yeah, you can see the slides, isn't it? All right. So I am at a little bit disadvantage after the fascinating talk by Sarah. She began by saying that old-fashioned normal charging, and the millions of points is not the way to go and do things. And in fact, it should be like a petrol station and future-proof. So I can agree with the future-proof part, but the rest of it, I will have to labor and argue my case that that is not perhaps the way we would like to start with. But as you see, my slide is structured in this manner. Yeah, on the left-hand side, you can see there is normal power, there is high power, and there is battery swap. All that is on the menu when you do things in India. And I will talk today about normal power charging because that's a topic given to me. And what my previous speaker spoke about is high power charging. I'll let it be. And I will talk about just this part of it. Let me put the slides. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing is we live in different climates. And this is where I come from, the red place. And when you say low and medium income economies, I kind of assume it's this area. And if that is so, the lessons we have here after about 7 years of work in this area, I think might be relevant. First thing is high ambient temperature. It's terrible for the battery. The electric vehicle battery is basically, it can be called as a refrigerated battery. You cannot do otherwise. And, so in a high ambient temperature, that becomes a little bit of a problem. And we have further problems when you talk about smaller vehicles, which do not have a cooling systems to begin with, like a two-wheeler, for example. It never has a refrigeration system. Even three-wheelers, even small cars sometimes are not really equipped. Then you have the monsoon weather, of course. So the and rugged situations of. But good thing is driving trips are smaller. People prefer lighter attire like I'm wearing, and smaller houses, smaller buildings, smaller transport, and they don't mind getting into buses. But that is not our aspiration. That's where we are today. Later, I suppose we can have Tesla kind of cars all over the place, but today we need to start where we are. So the idea about India's electric mobility transition is like, I think I'm really happy that we have this forum organized by the IEA, because we really are not looking at carbon dioxide as a main driver. We're looking at as a measurable, an index to measure how good we are. If we did well, carbon dioxide will reduce. But the first thing is to transport people, increase the growth, because growth and economic growth and mobility is directly correlated. So we need to get more people to move, more vehicles, and that is possible only with electricity, because you can't afford to pollute too much, and you cannot afford to import all of that oil, which we don't have anyway. So our targets are to begin with 1 million two-wheelers. The pickup has been slow, because the traditional our two-wheelers is quite strong. I think it's all over Africa and other places our two-wheelers go. They're pretty strong. They have resisted Chinese. No, I don't see even one Chinese two-wheeler being sold here. It is that strong. So they have investments to protect. So it was a slow pickup, but it's turning around very fast. Recently, the government has ordered about 300,000 three-wheelers. In fact, the first tender is already out for 100,000. And we are talking about 5,000 buses in the first lot. And these targets, they targeted 2023, but that may be a little ambitious, but those are the targets. And accompanying that is this cell manufacturing program. We will try to initiate a 50 gigawatt hour production and try and get the supply chain in place. Now, this is not easy. Particularly, the supply chain is very difficult. I'm talking to fellow countries in our situation. It's quite difficult, but that you need to make that effort. So I will stick to my topic here. The topic is about charging electric vehicle battery. So you need to look at the battery first. And I have this designation as a scientist, so I need to look at it a little bit like that. And I find there is not much you can do to fast charge a battery beyond a particular limit. If these are the batteries you talk about, these batteries are the current ones. The one used by Tesla is the one in the middle. The one on the left is the most popular battery, the NMC battery. And a little bit tolerant battery is the third one you have. It can handle a little bit of temperature, ambient temperature more. Still, refrigerant should be better. And finally, if you get a solid state battery on the right, then you can talk about all these things. There is no liquid to burst. So then you can really kind of move. So whatever we talk about charging today is for a paradigm for next 10 years, because certainly the battery will change. The lithium ion battery itself evolved and reached this place in the last 10 years. Before that, it was a battery full of cobalt and very different kind of situation. So when we talk about charging, there's another thing to consider. If you can afford to carry a big charger on your vehicle, then life is very easy. All you need to provide is plug points and nice, safe, what you call as electric vehicle supply equipment across the place. You could do that everywhere, in lampposts and all over. But that is a problem. You cannot carry too big a charger on board, because the technology is still waiting for the transition for new materials in power electronics, but that might as well change. So we are not talking about a very long-term solution. We're talking about getting the electric mobility off the ground right now. And I think that is where India is looking at, that we just want to get the people out on the roads, buy electric vehicles and get started. So I will have to differ and say that millions of charging points may be our way of getting things off the ground, which is not very difficult, because what we're saying is connect the vehicle to the electricity grid and do it wherever they are. So that's one part of the solution. I'm not talking about the high power solution. When you go high power, when you want to do a little bit faster charging and you cannot carry a big charger on board the vehicle, then the picture at the bottom explains what is required. It is the equipment outside will have to be told of the battery status at every microsecond, and there is a lot of communication, and that's where the whole problem begins. In any case, that equipment cannot force the pace of the charging. Everything is determined by the vehicle, the battery's management system, and issues with the battery. You need to force ions from one end to the other, and you will find that beyond a stage it is counterproductive. So, well, that's what it is. There are more details here. I leave it here. What constitutes a charging system? The list at the bottom here, both on the left and right, they are the subsystems which will come into play, and each one is governed by standards. So I head the BIS, the Bureau of Indian Standards program, which is dealing with this issue. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the site where these standards are available, and we are looking at this kind of a structure. I think altogether we will have about 34 standards, Indian standards, to cover this whole space. So we will divide it like this: 4 areas. AC and DC supply for a light electric vehicle. A two-wheeler just needs about 2 kilowatts of power. So if you want to fast charge a two-wheeler, you can provide 2 kilowatts of power and it'll get fast charged. So that's what we're dealing with. A million of them we can easily put out. We're talking about cars, which are small cars. In fact, in our country, we have a special category like in Japan. We have a 4-meter car, which is constituting about 80% of all the cars in the country. And when that gets converted to electric, you expect a battery pack of about 25 kilowatt hour size, which is what our three-phase connection, what I have at home, can give. So if I can get that connection onto the parking and just leave it there because it's just a connection, then that parking is now a place where you charge your vehicle. The distinction is this: when you have a small vehicle, this power can provide you adequate charging. And typically, when you go to a fast charging station, you're talking about charging in minutes because that's not the place where you're going to. That happens to a place you have to divert to get charging. But suppose this charger is available at the place where you want to reach, where you want to be. For example, your office, your home, or your shopping complex in malls, cinema theaters. Then you are in no hurry. You are going to stay there for an hour because you come for a purpose. So the category number one, normal power, is the idea, and we really intend to put millions out there, but not in charging stations. We're talking about the regular parkings where these things are parked. The second category, the high power one, of course, the DC, and we're talking about bus charging, pretty high power. So our fast charging would be for the high power stations would be for buses. Then we are also talking about interoperable battery swapping, which means a battery pack, let's say a kilowatt hour regular battery pack, which can be used in multiple units in scooters, three-wheelers, and maybe anywhere else, wherever you want to use it. It's an energy pack with its own self-contained BMS, a connection system which communicates all these data and all that. And of course, all this need to be networked to make it efficient. So one part of that is to tell the municipalities how to do this, because I'm going back to this. I'm talking about only the first category here because that is relevant for this bulk of this population of small cars. So my conversation is restricted to small cars, and it's not about. I'm not in any way saying that high power chargers shouldn't be there. My argument is that from our point of view, that to get started, for our kind of context, we need this ability to be able to provide charging where people live and work. So that's the idea, and it is not difficult because the vehicles are smaller. Now, along with that, you need to tell people, the people who approve these things at the local level, the guy in the electricity office or the mayor's office, and they must know what this is about, and they need not to do research. They should be provided with the right kind of guidance, standards, guidebooks, all of that. And we expect situations like this in this picture, that it's just like another socket specifically provided with an EV meter, like you have a smart meter. India is big on smart meter in homes. So smart meter for the parking, which can be controlled by the utility, and that opens the gateway for to integrate more renewables in it, to our prosumers who sell back the electricity, or even one way, what you call as V1G, where just the load is managed by a variable load out there. Because the generation is variable with increasing renewables. We have a lot of renewables coming in. That's when there is a cloud, the electricity generation goes down, and then the demand also varies. So you need an ability to vary the load at some place, and these are distributed charging units all over the place where people are plugged in. So the way to park your car or your scooter is to go plug it in and keep it there, and allow some transaction to happen. So we hope to reach there soon enough sometime. And as part of that, we have brought out a handbook, the first effort, to try and tell the municipalities how do you kind of utilize your distribution network in the locality to enable charging.
2 minutes.
So okay, I'm done. I think rest of the slides I can leave it. What I would like to say is we have on these slides, the top portion, I hope the slides will come to you. You have the Indian standard we have published. If it is published, the cost is written there. Often the cost is zero. We're giving it away. And so there's one thing I'd like to mention as an example. And after that, I can just leave these slides here for people to see. And if you're curious, buy those standards. Like sometimes you don't have to buy it, it's free of cost. You can check that out. So this is a very interesting thing. What we did is to look at the two-wheeler and see what chargers are around. So in Indian rupees, it's something like 50,000 rupees or something for the charger. This unit which provides electricity, and it is not a DC unit. It is an AC unit, which means it's just a plug point in some way. The cost of the electric vehicle is also the same. Now that's a bit odd. In fact, if you want to push two-wheelers out there, this is not going to work. So we put a target saying that can we provide this unit for $50? And we have achieved it. There is an Indian standard for it. You can see this right on top of this page. The first standard listed is expected to retail for something like $50 soon enough. Right now it's listed slightly higher. So what we did is to strip it off everything else except the safety and the essential things provided in the international standard, which is the same as the Indian standard, and communicate over Bluetooth to the mobile phone, because from there you're directly onto the internet and you can provide immense value-added services which may not be easily possible otherwise. So Bluetooth, some kind of a QR code and a database to consult, these kind of a things. And we have a finally working system. Now, the first order itself is about 30,000 units in New Delhi, the capital city. So that looks promising. And then we have also devised DC charge points, which dispense something like up to 7 kilowatts of power, just that much from a single phase unit. And you can charge two-wheelers and three-wheelers in large numbers. It'll be like across the road, like street furniture. Just one more point, and then I can kind of let the slides be. About destination charging. So what we're looking at is a paradigm that at the car park, we will not refuse any kind of car with any charging system. That means whether it's the Japanese charging system or the US charging system or the German GCS or whatever, this one should be able to provide all of them you should be able to charge it, whether two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or a small car. So there is an innovation project there. We are working with the cabling system which can accommodate all of that. So these kind of innovations become possible, and we will drive the costs down so that it is not a big issue to leave the charger in the car park. It will be like standard apparatus for a charging, for a car, for a park. So a couple of other slides, I don't have to speak about it. This is the high power thing. It goes all the way up to 500 kilowatts. And we have kind of worked on the standards, including something called dual gun charging, which is the innovation. And battery swapping, we haven't really kind of started to write the standard yet, but decisions have been taken. I think I can conclude there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sajid. This topic is definitely a very interesting and very timely topic. We have a lot of questions and a lot of things to be discussed, and unfortunately, not as much time as we would like to. I already see that now. Maybe a first question for you from Dennis from Opibus, an e-mobility company in Kenya. How can cities, governments facilitate timely approval of charging infrastructure to facilitate faster deployment and adoption of electric vehicles? And he's asking, starting from the basics. So maybe for someone who enters the market. Thank you.
We can tell you, we have failed to provide adequate charging facilities till now, because our situation was the central government approving locations and power access and all that. So from there, we have understood the key issue is access to power and appropriate small devices to get things going. Because for all our efforts, this big centralized effort, we could just put out about 1,000 major stations out there. And when you really go to the ground, there's nothing out there. So we are kind of changing the paradigm now. And for smaller vehicles, we're saying, give the guidelines, very clear guidelines, and empower the local electricity office and the mayor's office to take the decision. So you need to work on the guidelines, and depending on your location, how the country structure, the grid, and all of that. But I'm sure you can do that. If required any assistance, our guys are there. They can, you can consult with people.
Thank you very much. You have mentioned very quickly the battery swapping. I would be interested to know if you know of situations where you would advise for battery swapping or against it and better have a charger installed, if that is something you have looked at.
Yep. So if you have a vehicle which is small and without a cooling system, then it's advisable to go for battery swapping, because it becomes dangerous while you charge. So if you take the battery out of the vehicle and charge it, I'm talking about small vehicles, really small vehicles where you do not have an air conditioning system. So half the problem is solved. It might still get heated up if it is misused or rapidly accelerated, but the chances of it exploding is much lesser if you charge it outside. But it'll work only if you have an interoperable system. If the Honda and the Piaggio and everybody have their own battery, it's not going to work. The consumer will not benefit from it. So a consumer point of view, you need to have an interoperable battery, everything of the same size, the same connector and communication methods. So we're trying to get there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We'll take one last question. We have a question in the Q&A from Sahana, who mentions, given population density in Indian cities, most of the public spaces like malls and restaurants will be visited by many consumers. And so in the next couple of years, even workplaces would have a greater number of employees owning EVs. So one fast charger could cater to many EVs in a day as compared to a slow charger. Therefore, shouldn't fast chargers be encouraged at workplaces and public places to be able to cater to more EVs?
I hope there is a battery which can fast charge. In fact, there is a battery called the LTO, which does 10 times fast charging. And Volvo has demonstrated a bus can be charged in 10 minutes. Now, if you're using that battery, I'll say go for it. But that's about 5 to 10 times expensive compared to the current battery. And those other batteries are yet to come. So you're stuck. You cannot charge faster than 1 hour. You will have to be in queue. And if somebody's at the station, you have to be behind it. 10 minutes are fine, but that's for a car, not for a smaller vehicle. It's going to take a while. So at this point of time, fast charging hasn't got there yet.
Okay, thank you very much, Sajid. I think I will pass it back to Per for our third speaker.
Thank you very much,
yeah,
Julia,
ahead,
and thanks to you, Sayed, as well. I learned a lot. And again, I'm very happy that we can keep the slides and also share with the participants. There's a lot of useful information there, certainly. Yes, we now pass on to the third and last speaker of this first session, Matteo Muratori from the United States. Over to you to share your perspectives on this topic.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Per. Can you just confirm that you can hear me well and see the slides?
I hear you well, and we see the slides in presentation mode.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Just wanted to acknowledge from the excuse me, from the get-going, I worked on this with a colleague of mine, Brennan Borlaug. He couldn't be here with us this morning due to time differences, but we wanted to put together a little bit of a perspective on charging needs for medium and heavy-duty electric vehicles. Try to focus a little bit on this space. For those of you not familiar with what we do and who we are, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, is part of the US Department of Energy complex of national labs. And we are the one lab that focuses on energy efficiency and renewable energy. We are located in Golden, Colorado. You can find a lot of information on what we do on our website. And if you have interest in collaborating or having access to some of the research that we have done, just feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with the right person at the lab if that's not me. But in a sense, what we are in the business of is trying to find a solution to solve what this pie chart here is showing. This is greenhouse gas emissions in the United States from a number of different sectors. So what we're trying to do is find a solution to mitigate all of these charging emissions from agriculture, from buildings, from industry, from the power grid, as well as from transportation, which happens today to be the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States and growing extremely rapidly globally. You know, transportation is very heterogeneous. There are a lot of different modes and a lot of different applications within transportation. Today, I'm gonna focus, if you look there on the right-hand side, on the dark green, the medium and the heavy-duty vehicles. So those are all the delivery vans that you see around, you know, UPS or Amazon delivering vans in your city, all the way through those big trucks that run on highways. Here, the Class 8 semi-truck that we see here running around a lot in the United States. Medium and heavy-duty vehicles are responsible for 21% of transportation emission in the US and 31% globally. So it's a really big chunk of emissions, and it's a chunk that's growing over time. On top of emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, they are also a major source of local air pollutants that typically affects disproportionately disadvantaged communities. So a lot of co-benefits in transitioning towards zero-emission vehicles, battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, they really offer now a viable decarbonization pathway for these applications. So I'm not going to talk today about total cost of ownership and the business case for electric vehicles and whatnot. I'm really going to focus on the charging infrastructure. But to understand what charging needs are needed to support electrification of trucks, we need to understand how trucks are used. And I wanted to start with this chart here because at least here, we see a lot of misconception, especially on what we see here, the Class 7 and Class 8, the very large trucks. I think the understanding is that these trucks are just driven all the time. They're just always on the highway, driving back and forth, putting you know, hundreds of thousands of miles on the road every year. And sure, some of those trucks do that, but not all. What you see here is, for example, that 10% of heavy-duty truck in the US have a primary operating range that is above 500 miles, whereas 70% operate primarily within 100 miles. So a lot of really local and regional applications. And the charging needs for these different classes of trucks, it's the same vehicle, right? When you look at it, it looks exactly the same, but it's used in a very different way. And the charging needs are very, very different for these different vehicles. And let me tell you another thing that we have really seen, that the rise of e-commerce over the past several years is producing and has produced a shift towards decentralized hub and spoke model that is really pushing towards the decrease in the average length of haul. So instead of doing a lot of very long trips, trucks tend to do a lot of short trips and go back and forth between central hubs. So it's a very different way of operating the vehicle that has nothing to do with electrification or with charging. These are all diesel vehicles at this point. It's just a transition and a change in the business model in the trucking industry. And so we see even more opportunity for sort of short haul, like local short trip applications that, and I'll tell you in a couple of slides, those call for very different charging solution than the high power en route highway charging. To give a nice parallel, I'm hoping that you have seen this chart somewhere before. This is for light duty vehicle, and it basically shows how the core foundation of light duty vehicle charging is home, right? No place is like home. That's where you get the convenient charging while you're sleeping, while you're doing something else, and your vehicle just charges. And that's the base of the pyramid. And then we have workplace and public slow charging, and then public fast charging being the very tip of the pyramid. Critical. The whole pyramid is important. Don't get me wrong. It's not like we can't build the pyramid without one of these pieces, but the core foundation is slow, reliable home charging for light duty vehicles. Well, we see a very good parallel for medium and heavy duty vehicle. And that is the same pyramid, but for medium and heavy duty vehicles. And this is how we envision an effective way of electrifying medium and heavy duty vehicle. A big core foundation of depot charging, which in a sense is the home for all of these different trucks. What we see in the United States is that 87%, so almost 9 out of 10 trucks, have a primary operating range below 200 miles. They operate in a very limited area, and they return to their base every night or every day if they operate overnight. And that is a key tremendous opportunity to provide charging for these vehicles. We think that charging it could be level 2 in some cases, you see in a couple of slides, or it might have to be DC, direct current. And I think here, we call it fast charging from a light duty vehicle perspective. 50 to 100, 150 kilowatt for a big truck with a 1,000 kilowatt hour battery. It isn't necessarily fast from a battery perspective, but we think that those are the power level that would be needed. The next opportunity in our mind is what we call opportunity charging. For example, while we load and unload trucks or during breaks, they can really provide a lot of advantages and a lot of chances of charging these vehicles without impacting the way that they are operated, without adding any additional stop. And then the tip of the pyramid, as you probably guessed, is very similar to what we have seen for light duty vehicles, the very fast public en route charging. So now here we really get to fast from a medium and heavy duty perspective. We're talking megawatt plus level charging, while we think that for light duty vehicle, probably 350 kilowatt is a good high level or maybe upper bound for public charging. And this provides a safety net. You do need a reliable network of fast chargers in case something goes wrong, right? In case something unexpected happens and you just need to charge, you don't want to get stranded on the road, as well as for the long haul application. Those few trucks, and there are a few, but they do consume a lot of energy because they drive a lot, that drive across country and drive a lot. So this is our vision for what a network should look like. But a couple of data points, the ICCT published in in September, a report where they estimated that 2 million overnight private chargers, so what we call depot chargers, are needed to support a fleet of 2.4 million trucks in the US. Very high reliance on depot charging. Atlas Public Policy just published last month a report where they also project that most chargers will be needed at depot, about 75 to 90% in their estimates. So I guess we're not in this alone. We are seeing a number of studies coming out that recognize the value and the need for depot charging. This is particularly timely for us because we just published here in June a paper to understand heavy duty truck electrification and the impact of depot charging on distribution systems, so on the power system. We teamed up with Tesla, we teamed up with a couple of utilities here in the US, Southern Company and Encore, you see here in the author list, and the paper was published a few months ago in Nature Energy. The paper is available. All the data that was generated to produce the paper is available, and all the code that we had to implement to do this analysis is also freely available on GitHub. So any more details that you need on this, just feel free to reach out or follow these links, and everything is made available for you. But what we did is we took real world data from 3 fleets of trucks that are operating in the US. We took over 3,000 days of operating data from the different fleets. And what you see here are plots of daily driving distance and daily charge availability. Basically, how many hours would these trucks spend at their depot where they could be available to charge? Well, I think it's clear from this charts. You see vehicles are driven, as I was telling you earlier, a lot of vehicles drive typically less than 1 to 200 miles per day. Sure, there might be an exception day, especially if you look at the bottom left there, the blue bars. There was one day where one truck drove more than 500 miles, but the vast majority of days, you see very low mileage level. And this corresponds with very significant time available at depot to charge. What we see is that on average, 14 hours of downtime per day is what these 3 fleet were reporting. Not reporting actually. We're having this. This is here measured data. So a lot of opportunities for depot charging, and depot charging provides a lot of load flexibility. This enables to manage what the charging load looks like, reduce peak demand, and in general, leverage cheap electricity if available. So let me go a little bit more into that in a bit. But what this plot shows is the charging power level that was needed to provide charging to these trucks during those days. And I think the one thing that surprised us is how low these numbers are. when you look at this, you usually would expect hundreds of kilowatts or megawatt to charge these trucks. Well, you see here for fleet one, there was no day they require more than 20 kilowatt of charging. This is a level 2 light duty vehicle already commercially available charger. That's more than enough to recharge all those trucks in every single day of their operations. Fleet 2 and 3 require a little bit more. I mean, Fleet 2 really not. It's still about 20 kilowatt. Fleet 3 might require a little bit higher level charging, but we're still talking very low power level compared to what we hear in the literature and what we hear being discussed. So a lot of opportunity to find to find solution to charge these trucks at power level that are already commercially available. And this low power charging really provides a number of financial benefits. We try to summarize it here, but from a utility perspective, having a lower peak really reduces the peak demand and provides a smooth and predictable load profile. And that really helps with planning from a grid perspective. From fleet managers, installing a low power charger is a lot cheaper than installing a high power charger. So from an equipment perspective, there are significant cost savings, and the cost here really don't scale linearly, they grow exponentially. And so a 50 kilowatt charger is as much as 80% cheaper than a 350 charger. So very significant cost savings from an investment perspective at the beginning. But that's not it. Lower power level also means lower electricity cost, especially when you have demand charges, which is really common in the United States. And so we see a number of win-win here for going for low power solutions at depot. And we're showing here that's more than enough to support all the vehicles in this application.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Per. So before concluding here, I just want to remind everyone, again, this is a pyramid, and the foundation we think is depot charging, but that doesn't mean en route fast charging isn't absolutely required and needed for some application. So don't take this talk as, okay, depot charging is all we need to do. But we think is 80% of what we need to do. We also see the need for these high power fast charging stops being deployed along our highways. And that's the subject for a different talk. But the other thing that we looked at in this paper that I thought I would share, and I'm not going to go into details, but I'm going to just tell you that this exists in the paper, is we look closely at how this kind of application would impact distribution systems. And so you see here, for example, a table that shows the typical cost and the typical timeline needed to upgrade distribution systems to accommodate for depot charging. And one of the big insights here is that this can take a long time. And so early planning and early engagement with utilities is absolutely critical, because if it takes over a year just to prepare the distribution system, you want to have that process start as early as possible. And also don't think of grid integration just as an impact. It's not just, oh, I'm going to impact the grid and we're going to need upgrades. This kind of charging, this slow charging that happens over a long period of times is really keen to be used to managing that charging and shifting that charging and responding to the need of the power supply. And this graphic here is from a forthcoming paper, is for light duty vehicles, but you see the kind of value that you can get, thousands of dollars per year per vehicle of value that you can untap just by charging in a more smart way. So really critical to keep this in mind. It's not just an impact on the grid, it's really an opportunity to effectively integrate with the grid. So I'll conclude here because I know we are almost at time, but vehicle electrification is really transforming the landscape in transportation, and medium and heavy duty vehicle is a tremendous opportunity for electric vehicle. We do really see the need for demonstration projects to assess the transition obstacles, build knowledge on charging need, cost, effective practices, and how to integrate with the grid in an effective way. To do this, we think really understanding how trucks are used and what are the needs on the demand side is going to be critical. Like what you saw here, the EV charging needs are a lot lower than what we would have guessed without doing this study. So really important to dive a little bit deeper in the analysis here and understand what the needs are, and keep in mind the opportunities for synergistically integrating with the grid, and not just thinking about, okay, how am I going to impact the grid and how much that's going to cost and how long it's going to take, but what possible value I can provide to the grid, because there is a lot of value opportunities there. I'll stop there. We'll share this slide with some references and my contact in case anyone has more questions, but looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Matteo. This was really very interesting, and I think also a little bit reassuring for governments that are looking at electrifying heavy-duty vehicles, even though it's not all there is, but if 80% of the charge can be done with smaller capacities, that's already something. Maybe on the first question, we have a question from the audience asking on the readiness. So what is the readiness of public charging infrastructure for commercial purposes like line haul and interstate logistics?
Yeah, that network really doesn't exist today. So I think we are still in the R&D and demonstration phase really today. We NREL and a number of other national labs are really working hard to design and demonstrate what those high power station could look like. We are building a station that has a 2 megawatt charger to understand what that means and how to operate and what are the standards. So we're working hard in that space. I think the next phase is going to be demonstrating it. But from a practical perspective, today that network just doesn't exist. If someone were to buy a truck and wanted to drive across country, there wouldn't be any way of doing that, at least in the United States.
Thank you. So stay tuned for the results of those demonstration projects. We have another question from Hannes Neupert. Any timeline recommendations for bus fleet transitions?
Yes, so we see buses really being the one segment between medium and heavy duty that is the ripest. It's really ready for action. It's been ready for action for years. There are thousands. I mean, here my EIA colleagues can provide better statistics than I can, but there are thousands of electric buses already being operated in a number of cities globally. So we see tremendous opportunity to do adoption now. I think the buses are ready, and most of those buses can be charged at depot. The big advantage of those commercial application is really how schedulable they are, right? You know how a bus is going to be operated. There is very little uncertainty. And so you can really design the vehicle and design the charging system based on your need and find ways to charge those vehicles overnight if they're not operated overnight, or during breaks if they're operated 24/7. But a lot of examples to draw from several cities who have done this. So we think buses are really in the deployment phase, and we think over the next 5 to 10 years, electric buses are just going to be the norm. That's what everyone is going to adopt in that space. We hope.
So if you had a government asking you what let's say the low-hanging fruit of heavy and medium duty vehicles is, you would say, okay, the last mile maybe, and then the buses as well.
I think the buses are really the first, and then the last mile, as you said, the delivery van that they drive in our city, and they contribute majorly to poor urban air quality as well, which is a major co-benefit here. And in my mind, the long haul, the very long distance trucks, that's going to be maybe a third wave in this framework. That they're going to come last.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One last question, since we're talking a little bit environmental impact, what would be the impact of reducing speed limits and imposing brakes for drivers every 4 hours, like in Europe?
So we haven't really done that analysis in detail, so I can't provide specific numbers. Reducing speed limit usually leads to improvement in fuel economy and improvement in emissions that are not on the same scale, or not even comparable to what you would get with electrification. So I don't think we should forget that. Sure, improving an internal combustion engine, a diesel truck is good, right? It reduces energy use, it reduces emissions. So we are in favor of that. But let's not put it on the same level of what we can do with a zero emission vehicle. It's just two different scales, basically. Also keep in mind, a critical aspect for us is reducing not just greenhouse gas emissions, but the pollutants emissions. And that's really only achievable with a zero emission vehicle. And we see tremendous advantages for that. There are a lot of areas, especially around ports, for example, where you have heavy traffic, you have ships often still using engines in port as needed, all the equipment on site in the ports, which falls into this category, right? Those are medium and heavy duty vehicles. They really lead to poor air quality in these areas that are usually disadvantaged. They're often low income, and we see a tremendous opportunity here we have found a technological solution to solve a lot of those problems. So we see a lot of co-benefits there, not just reducing greenhouse gases, but reducing the pollutants emissions is key.
Thank you very much. I think we'll close it here for this first session. So I'll give it back to Per, but thank you very much, Matteo, and thanks to the other speakers. It was really very interesting, which shows at the level of questions.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
having us.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks for the three of you for joining here today, and thanks for Julia as well for those questions. Indeed, one would wish to have a bit more time to discuss some of these conclusions and suggestions. The virtual format is, of course, challenging for doing that, but at least with the virtual format, it's easier to gather colleagues as we had in this first session and also in the second session. So we're very pleased as well to be able to hold this virtual format of this meeting to gather the right expertise for this first webinar for this policy brief. But then let me take you to the second session of today, which will be a panel discussion. We have 4 colleagues here today that will react and also on what we heard, of course, during the first session, and how to apply this to low and middle income countries. We have 4 speakers, which will give 5 minutes for introductory remarks and then react to what we heard during the first session. Again, we'll have Julia to moderate that, and the 4 speakers are first Urska Skert, who is mobility manager at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You're also a member of Working Group 4, like the other speakers we have today, and you lead the Business Council project on mobility decarbonization and value framework. And we had discussions in particular with you on how to mobilize investments and public-private partnerships. So great to have you here, Urska. And second speaker or panelist is Francesco Cabeza, who is the EV lead at Element Fleet Management. You also working Group 4 member and with several years experience from the EV industry, ENGIE as the mobility manager there, but also the Federal Commission of Electricity, where you were the country lead. It's great to have you here as well with us. And the third speaker, also not known in this context, is Hitan Parmar, director at the YILO Electromobility Program in South Africa. You have great to be working with you over the last years, also for DVI and that network. And you have contributed in the past to the Global Sustainable Mobility Partnership report, but of course also a lot of experience in this topic from South America, but also from global international conversations on e-mobility. And finally, but not last, Lucia Rakosevic from Think-E, where you are Research and Development Manager. And for the ones who doesn't know, Think-E is an energy consultancy focused on energy transition guidance. And we're also very pleased to have you here with your technical expertise, and in particular, the focus on regulations. And again, another Working Group 4 member under the GEF program. So it's great to have all of you here. So I'll now turn to Julia to moderate this session. And again, please use the Q&A to ask questions and comments, and then we can see if we pick it up if time allows. But also, of course, all comments are also extremely valuable for the group and the next steps. So don't hesitate not to ask questions, but also comment. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you very much, Per, and welcome everyone. I will tag it off directly, asking my 4 panelists here to give their introductory remarks, and please complete those introductory remarks by the one recommendation that you would like to pick out from the 3 speeches we have heard. I know that is a very complex task because it was very in-depth and very diverse. But it doesn't mean that you don't like the others if you pick one or the other. So I'll let you decide and argue your choice. And I'll give the floor to Orska for our first speaker, please.
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Just a second, I need to share the screen. Doesn't see it. For some reason, I cannot open the.
If you go on the right bottom, I think there should be a button that allows you to go in the full screen.
Yeah, I do not see it in this mode. Just a second. I'm connected to the large video. Just a second. All right. Now it should work.
Yes, now we have it. Perfect.
Yeah, sorry for this. And thank you everyone for first inviting me to the webinar. It was amazing to hear the presentation from the previous speakers, and I'm happy to share also our perspectives from the World Business Council and to reinforce some of the messages that my previous speakers bring. A quick introduction. World Business Council is a global CEO-led organization of more than 200 forward-thinking businesses, and we work together with them to help them transition to a sustainable world. We see that reaching net zero, it's on one side a systemic challenge, but also an investment challenge. So in order to improve the business case, which is crucial to ensure deployment of EV technologies, but also charging infrastructure to the level that is needed to achieve net zero targets, we on one side need to align the ecosystem across the common technologies, across the common roadmap for deployment, and of course the policy framework. We heard a lot today on what are the challenges in regards to high capital investment costs, and of course we also understand that in order to achieve the sustainable and also inclusive and fair transition, there will be also a need to align with the governments on how to support the funding on some of the use cases. What we try to achieve with our members in this year is to align them on the common vision of how the interconnected system that on one side considers the need of mobility, the energy, but also the real estate looks like. The colleague Sarah from Fastnet mentioned how important it is to access the space. So we see that it is crucial also for our members to realize what is the value, a shared value that can be unlocked on the intersection of these 3 sectors. And by unlocking this value, we see that we can contribute to improving the business case in parallel to improving the business case with government funding that is needed for less utilized use cases. So we started really from the perspective of how we can improve the business case and define what are the 3 optimization scenarios. So as mentioned, one is efficient and economically and environmentally efficient EV fleets. We see that EV fleets are one of the first deployers of electric vehicles, and EV transition of light electric vehicles especially is already happening today. So there is urgency to act. The second one is accessible, smart and low-cost charging infrastructure. And here I would reinforce the message from a colleague from US, so Matteo, on how important it is to consider this overall system integration and unlocking the value of flexibility, and also thinking of how mobility can bring value to the grid itself. And the last one is where is the value and how we can integrate the overall space, and what kind of additional services the owners of space can monetize on when they are deploying the charging infrastructure, but also how can technologies such as microgrid technologies support optimizing the cost efficiency for the buildings and other spaces. So I will not go into the details. I will share later on in the chat the link to the framework, but basically we had a range of discussions with the members that are in these sectors, mobility, energy, real estate, but also with EV fleets, to identify what are the key use cases and what are the key technologies that members, so businesses, can invest in order to support this overall vision of interconnected systems that improves the business case. And on the very high level, we provided 9 key recommendations. This is then further split in terms of the policy recommendations of how governments can support the transition, but first, how businesses can support the transition in terms of where and how they can act. So we see 9 key action areas. As mentioned already before, we see that fleets will be the catalyzers for mass adoption. So one of the action points, one of the recommendations would be to design the network that address the needs of EV fleets in order to improve the utilization. The second one would be to encourage the demand flexibility. And here it is crucial also that the complete system is designed in a way that incentivizes the change of consumption. And this will allow us to ensure that the overall investments in the grid are optimized, and also that the cost, consequently, the cost of charging is optimized. We see that it is crucial to have digitalization, not only on the mobility side, but also in the energy and infrastructure. And in order to achieve that, we need to agree on the data sharing principles. Without having access to this information, it will be difficult to design the system that addresses really the needs of the users. Then if I move to one of the key points, we see that is crucial, and here we will see important role of the governments to establish the coordinated strategic planning and management, and also to coordinate the actors along the deployment of this integrated system. It is important to share space. This is one of the enablers to provide additional services for the real estate, but also to have the space to deploy charging infrastructure and to provide overall interconnection on the transport integration. On the energy side, as discussed, there is still a need to incentivize charging integration, because a lot of the use cases, especially underutilized areas, are not yet profitable in terms of the business model. But also what is crucial is to facilitate charging integration. And this is especially referring to streamlining the permitting procedures, which are a big cost and time barrier also for fast deployment of charging infrastructure. And of course, in order to achieve this optimal energy and transport integration, we need to encourage deployment of smart grid technologies. And in order to maximize charging from renewable sources, technologies such as storage and building energy management systems and local renewable energy sources will be the key. So these are the recommendations that we have defined together with our members on the global level. But of course, it is very important because all the markets have their own characteristics also to work on the local level with the national governments. And this is also something that we are working on, and we have our flagship project is it has also been working together with the Indian government to look specifically of what are the policies and what are the recommendations to accelerate the investments in India. Now, if I return back on what would be the key point that I would like to bring in terms of what should be the actions on one side from the first presentations, but also how we can deploy this to developing countries. Very strong point that was discussed today is, as they said, thinking about the integrated system and how realizing how important will be the access to space, the role of the governments in terms of enabling easier permitting process, but also what I already mentioned, we really resonate with what Matteo from US said in terms of considering what is the value that this overall ecosystem can create, also for the energy system. And when governments are considering developing and designing the system, that they do consider the technologies from the wider perspective. So not only from the charging hardware, but also on how the complete system is interconnected. And if
Thank you very much.
Just a final thought of how we can deploy some of the recommendations is development governments. It's really prioritizing the investments. And here, as said, if we can focus on addressing the needs of EV fleets, we can accelerate the deployment also for other use cases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Urska. I'll now pass the floor to Francisco with the same question, please.
Thank you, Julia. It has been really interesting participations. I think Sarah, Matteo, and Sajid, it allows me to talk about public and private infrastructure and how we can make it happen in low-income economies. First, I would like to talk about what is the national e-mobility strategies. As you can see, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Costa Rica, we have their national strategies. And in the last point, all the countries agree to have electric vehicle, supply equipment, public network installation. And the question is, in low-income economies, how can we make it happen? There's two ways to make it happen. The first one, we will talk about the 360 degrees ecosystem for e-mobility. In the private sector, for example, us as Element, what we do is we integrate the full solution in a full leasing for 5 years. What we got is that we have a similar total cost of ownership compared to an internal combustion engine. What we do is we integrate utility, infrastructure, maintenance, monitoring of the vehicles and infrastructure, and also site generation if it's required. Similar total cost of ownership, 5 years. 5 years, it already happens in Mexico, for example. This is the private sector. Let's talk about public sector and how we can make it happen in low-income economies. Okay, first, in the infrastructure, Smart strategies. What we did in Mexico, it was alliances with the automotive, the private sector, the utilities, and the government. What we did, we started from 180 electric vehicles equipments, and we end up in 3 years with 3,000 EV chargers. How we make it happen? First, the automotive industry, they have a need. They need to have public infrastructure in order to sell vehicles. Private sector, they collaborate to give the parking lots or the public spaces. This is very important. Public, we call it semi-public, to malls, shopping malls, restaurants, universities, hospitals, all destination charging. Utilities from the energy side, and the government gave us 12,000 million US dollars in order to install electric vehicle equipment. The second very important part is to identify if you are going to install public network, which type of connector, which type will be the best to promote according to the network installations. For example, in North America, we have 120 volts, and in Europe, you have 220 volts in one line. So for the public network, we promote the SAI G1772. That is the one that fits the best for public network in Mexico, from Alaska to Colombia. So it was the best way to promote the public infrastructure network. The third one, the use of installed capacity is a must. If we discover all the power transformers that has a capacity that we are not using, we can use this capacity to install EV chargers without extra cost. And we could save 30% in electricity cost and 40% in installation infrastructure. Something additional is the heat map. We have to see 2 maps of the public transport, the routes of the public transport, and where do we have the substations. We cross the information, and then we have where are the best places to suit the infrastructure to charge the public buses. Opportunity charge or charging at a depot, as Mateo already said, we could find the best places to lower the pricing on the infrastructure in the closest places to the substations that have the capacity installed in order to charge the public buses. And the fifth one in infrastructure, the highway network is a real challenge. Because of the capacity, in most of the highways, we do not have the medium power need requirements for public charging, fast charging, as Fastnet, for example. So we have to upgrade the grid, and it's very expensive. And you have very few vehicles, so you do not have the demand in order to accede to this investment in public highways. And also safety issues. Some of the countries we're talking about, we have safety issues in terms of personal safety issues that we have to solve also to have public charging in highways. Talking about public policy, quick wins. As most of you may know, public infrastructure is a real estate job. So if we have public policy ordering that any place with public parking must have a percentage of EV parkings, we will guarantee the people willing to have EV chargers in their parking places. New constructions should have a percentage of parkings and the consideration with the energy capacity. What happens right now is that we find buildings that do not have energy capacity, and it will be very expensive to have the capacity to charge electric vehicles in those buildings. So if we have a public policy on new construction, we could help install the private and the public infrastructure. As I mentioned, we should have both in order to have a proper ecosystem to charge electric vehicles. What we did, 30% discount in tax for charging public infrastructure. This is very important because people now have the willingness, and if they have the order, they will have an extra incentive on this to put in public charging infrastructure. Another one should be all public charging infrastructure should be reported to the Energy Secretariat. This is to help the energy ministries to have planning on the grid capacity and grid upgrades. And the last but not least is all public charging should be smart. It has to be monitored. One problem we did not solve properly in Mexico is that the 3,000 EV chargers we have in the country are not monitored. It means we do not have information on public charging, and also we do not know if the chargers are working or not. It has to be universal. We have to guarantee that the customer experience is a proper customer experience. It means it doesn't matter which kind of vehicle I have, I go to any place and I could charge my vehicle. How can we guarantee this? By installing at least the standard for the country, and another one if another automotive industry wants to promote GBT or IAC, for example, and promote the open communication protocols and guarantee who will be the charge point operator and the mobility service provider. Marketing strategies is a very good strategy at early stages in this kind of countries. For example, luxury brands, what they're doing is that they have 6 square meters public promoting space. So they install the EV charger, they put the branding on the charger and in the box of on the parking, and it's very cheap for the brand to have public publicity by installing one EV charger. This is how we promote at the early stages, how we can install public chargers and have some income from somewhere, because as we have very few vehicles, it would be very difficult to start by selling electricity or by trying to monetize the public charging, as most of our customers will have a charger at home or at workplace or at depot, as Mateo mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Francisco. If you could wrap it up, please.
This is the last one. Charging as a service could be an opportunity for taxis, delivery, and ride hailing. This is comparing Netflix to Blockbuster. It's a charging as a service model where you guarantee parking and all what you can see on the right box. I end up with this one.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure we will have the opportunity to look at that in more detail in the rest of the talk. I will pass the floor now to Hiten, please.
Thank you, Julia, and Per as well, and pleasure to join you today from South Africa and share into this exciting webinar and very topical for promoting uptake around electric mobility and reference cases for developing and low-income, medium to low-income countries as well, or regions. I will get started in sharing insight from the Global Sustainable Mobility Partnership, of which we received the request just to contribute to the findings from this report from that. So WheeLo is a national program in South Africa for the last 8 years, and also supporting the Global Sustainable Mobility Partnership. This specific report launched at COP26 was looking at policies for mature, flourishing, and equitable EV charging ecosystem. I think there's key highlights that come out of that. This specific piece of work was for the ICCT and looked at the scope similar to what we're trying to achieve today. And I think there's key synergies that have been highlighted across the various speakers that have shared from the initial introductions in session 1. And that's really where it is. Part of the report also tried to get geographical representations, which is included within the GSMP founding members across various regions across the world. So let's start unpacking that. So I think it's important to look at, equitable access for EV charging infrastructure relies on a mature ecosystem. You have various use cases, and I think Mateo also brought in a different perspective to that, and the earlier presentations as well from India showed the use cases in low-speed vehicles and light-duty vehicles. So I think what is key in the infrastructure side, it really needs to cater for the various segments around that. Expanding on that, also highlighted from the various presentations, is that there's different modes of charging, and this is what is required. To have a mature system and ecosystem, we need to balance these in terms of the locations and what usage cycles and what types of vehicles these are. The aspects on policies, and I think this is what's also come out from that, is looking at the policies to support that. It came out around unreliability. Sarah shared that from that perspective, and just having first-hand experience. Interoperability is a key thing as we see this market developing, and the reference case for low and middle incomes is to make sure that we learn the experiences from international markets. Aspects of protocols, vendor lock-in, these are all critical things. Sarah also mentioned aspects of competition. This is very key in terms of that. A lack of coordinated policy, and I think this is the piece of work that the IEA and the GEF program, global program, is trying to do, is to try to give the right signals from policy so that the markets can develop accordingly within that. And then electricity network constraints. I think this is a key thing for developing countries and developing regions to look at, because as we promote sustainable mobility, the question is how secure is our energy supply to match this aspect. And then also on the business cases, we need to look at these. These were also shared from the earlier presentations as well. A very interesting aspect is around the equality and equity of society. We need to fully acknowledge all the different scope of our communities and aspects that we're seeing within Europe as well. It's a case of disabled drivers, EV drivers. How accessible what is the accessibility for them to EV chargers? And what are the challenges? These are the key things we need to be mindful in developing regions and markets to make sure that the infrastructure that we deploy today is fully inclusive and also picking up on the learned lessons from international markets. And this is what it is. It's key that an equity-focused approach is required around electric infrastructure for EV charging. It also needs to look at the community-based models and engaging with the community to make sure that it's a key incorporated development process. Then also measure and analyze the results, because every region is different. We had the experience from India to say that there's also environmental concerns. And these are the things that all, that we need to be mindful in every region and deployment of that as well. So just zoning in South Africa as well, and I think this is what also brings in and some of the key highlights. Within our facilities, we deployed a EV to grid interoperability facility in 2015, and really looking at what is the future constraints of the grid going to be in a region like South Africa and other regions. And the key thing is securing energy supply. So within the facility, and also Matteo also mentioned aspects of demonstration projects within this facility, promoting this within South Africa and Africa. It's looking at on-site generation and strengthening the grid capacity, storage, as well as within the space of EVs in terms of second life EV batteries, looking at the whole DC charging, AC network charging, vehicle to X in terms of ancillary services, and then looking at the incorporation of multiple charge point operators. How are we going to get this right in every region? And then looking at energy management. I think this is the key that we look at in every region. And I think what also came out across is it really requires an ecosystem approach. And certainly that's what we've been trying to promote within UILO in South Africa, and looking forward to those value-add contributions to the global EV program through the specific work package and the work program. So with that was just brief insights on that. And then Julia gave us a difficult task of trying to pick, the key things, and it is difficult. So from my side, what I'm going to do is I made key notes from each speaker, and I think that's where it is. It's not a silver bullet that everybody spoke to, but Julia spoke about the chicken and egg scenario. But I think in this case, looking at that and the reference cases from international markets, secure the infrastructure. The vehicles will come. The manufacturers are under pressure for that. The key thing is competition. Promote competition, and I see this is the key example. We need to encourage that. Consumers shouldn't be faced with vendor lock-in as the first movers as much as there's pioneers within the industry. We need to be mindful of that. And then Sajid also said the environmental concerns. I think this is what we need to be relative of, the unique cases in different regions. And then also Matteo from that side, the aspects of demo projects, and then also specific requirements of the commercial vehicle application. So I think these are the key things and takeaways that I certainly noted from session one. And things that we need to be mindful in low and medium developing countries. So thank you for your attention, and really looking forward to the sessions that follow and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heaton. Very much agree with the fact that all the points were interesting, and we just keep on adding more and more interesting things. So I'm very glad that this has been recorded. Passing now the floor to Lucia, please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lucia Rakotovic and I come from Tinky, and I will use hopefully less time than foreseen to just quickly present what we do. Let me put that in presentation mode. Can you see that? Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I'm a technical background, but I'm also involved with the regulatory issues, and we work a lot with the local governments, with the cities and municipalities, and also islands. One thing that I would like to mention is that I represent Tinky, so we are a very, let's say, interdisciplinary company. And what we do is we work on creating an enabling framework for innovative technology to be implemented. What does this mean? That means that when we have a technology that's ready, such as vehicle-to-grid or fast charging, and we have an outlined business model, there is still a lot of struggles, as we also heard today, until this is actually implemented the first time and then taken up on a large scale. And that's where we come in, and that's where we try to help. One of those examples where we try to simplify, for example, solutions, simplify what city governments can do is where this publication that I'm showing right now, where we explain to the city governments what are some of the issues that are out there, what are some of the technologies in a, let's say, a simple and approachable language where they can understand, okay, we can take this, what can we do, what are action points? And also we provide some, let's say, useful resources where they can find more information. We also collaborate with, for example, European Commission in this case, trying to figure out what are some of the best practices and how can, what are the barriers out there technology-wise. As we heard, interoperability, one of the main barriers, one of the lessons learned that we see also in Europe, but also in the other countries, in the countries outside of Europe. Then what are some regulatory issues that we see, especially regarding to the energy market, and what are some of the benefits, and can we actually use some of the benefits that charging infrastructure can offer? And then finally, and maybe most important in implementation, it's the social barriers. And then we look at how regulation can actually help tackle some of these barriers, and how can the charging infrastructure be integrated with the grid. And then finally, as I mentioned, we're also within the EU Islands Secretariat. We're also involved in the technical assistance to some of the islands in the European Union who are trying to implement electric mobility. And that's a bit of a special case, as we'll discuss maybe later on. So if we think about the uptake or the let's say, deployment of the charging infrastructure, what are some of the main and important things? And we've heard this from few speakers today, and that's some from experience, some, let's say, from understanding how different examples have worked across the globe, and that's stakeholder collaboration. What does that mean? Usually when we talk about charging infrastructure, it's usually energy experts or mobility experts, and then one talks from the mobility point of view. The energy experts always talk about what are the benefits that you can do to the energy system, but we have to understand that if you go to a municipality, if you go to a city government, and you want to implement this structure, usually energy sector issues are handled by one sector, mobility issues are handled by another sector, then urban planning or spatial planning is handled by another sector, and you need to figure out how to bring these people together. And sometimes it's also on the different levels of the government, because especially in developing countries, electricity is usually a national issue that is handled from the national perspective, while spatial planning is usually done on a local level. So you need to find a way to integrate these. But also these stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, need to understand what are these technologies, what can they do, what are their capabilities, but also what are their limitations, because we talk a lot of times, what are some of the, let's say, benefits that users can get, but we need to explain and be very clear to the users and also to the stakeholders, can they actually get those benefits right now? Can they get those benefits? Can they get them in a short term? What needs to be done in a short term? What needs to be done in a long term for those benefits to be unlocked, let's say. And then finally, we also heard that, but because there are in the first implementation, because there are all these, let's say, social barriers that people are faced with in new technology, of course, especially in the smaller, let's say, in the smaller municipalities, in the islands, people are more conservative and they're also concerned about security of supply, which is normal. So usually with the first implementation, what we've seen is that it's best to go to the business to business, which we've heard, like fleet implementation, public fleets, or car sharing or leasing, where you can provide an opportunity for people to see how this functions and use it, but not having to invest in it initially. And then I say this, although this is very controversial, I guess, but as we've heard also from the colleague from Mexico, definitely the charging infrastructure should be smart. The charging infrastructure rolled out anywhere should be smart. You should be able to monitor it and know where it is, how much it's consuming, so that you have this visibility from the energy sector point of view. And then what we want to say is when you go to the normal charging, you have to unlock vehicle to grid. Why is this important? That's important because we always talk about energy, but actually the main problem of the chargers is capacity. And if we talk about normal chargers or the slow chargers, they're already up to 11 kilowatts or 22 kilowatts. This is either 5 or 8 or 10 households, depending on the country, depending on the consumption. So it's not a small capacity that you're introducing to the network. And that sort of brings me to the last point, which is the renewable energy. It needs to be the rollout of the charging infrastructure needs to be coupled with the renewable energy. If we are talking about grids that have issues with capacity, if we're talking about the, let's say, low and medium income countries, these things need to be put together to assure security of supply. Thank you. That's everything for me for the introduction. And then I'm looking forward to the questions.